And good morning. My name is Ryan Belmore. It is 11:31 a.m. here on Tuesday, October 6th. And joining me is Mr. Frank Prosnitz. And hello, good afternoon, Frank.
Good afternoon. How are you, Ryan?
I'm doing all right. I do want to let people know here at the top that if you have Verizon wireless service, they are having a massive outage across southern New England, the Northeast. People are having problems getting calls, making phone calls, getting texts. So I've reached out to Verizon for updates. We'll post them on whatsupnewp.com as I get updates.
Well, that explains a lot about my phone this morning.
Yes, I was trying to call you for a little while, and it's not working. So
it wasn't happening.
It's all right. It's kind of nice. But what are we getting into today, Mr. Prosnitz?
Who knows? Oh, we actually, pretty important and interesting conversation. Dr. Michael Fine is the former director of the Department of Health in Rhode Island. Was always writing throughout his life. Is the author of a novel, is the author of many short stories. So I want to talk to him a lot about, well, he's also written a book that is called Healthcare Revolt, which is now being picked up on Audible. And it's a nonfiction book, obviously about healthcare. And he's added a chapter. What was that? Coronavirus, chaos, and democracy. So we certainly want to get into some of his perceptions of what's going on, how Rhode Island is doing, how the state is doing, some of the things that he's hearing. And then he also has a book of short stories coming out in November. We'll talk about that as
Excellent.
well.
So the doctor is here. So what I'm going to do is bring him on and let you guys have a conversation. And here he is, Mr. Dr. Michael Fine. How are you?
I'm good. Nice to see you both.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm good.
So I guess let's I mentioned the books, and I mentioned this additional chapter on coronavirus, chaos, and democracy. How's Rhode Island doing?
I think we're doing okay, about the same as the rest of the country. Not much better, not much worse. But the country is, we are the hardest hit country in the world by far. And that's, to me, the central challenge, that we're used to the United States being the greatest country in the world and doing better than anybody else. Not with coronavirus, not even close.
So we hear a lot of things that the president didn't address this quick enough. We don't have enough the protective materials for even healthcare workers. Why are we so behind?
Well, I think we really lack consensus about what this is and how to be one country. We are so divided that our division has left us vulnerable to what is just a cold virus at the end of the day.
Why are we so divided? Obviously, it comes down to leadership, right? So, but I didn't even know if I guess what I'm feeling is that the current leadership has really just kind of unearthed the divide that was already here in this country, and that we would have had this struggle and this divide regardless of what went on in the White House.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think in many ways it comes down to followership as much as leadership. That is, we are so divided as a country and so convinced that we all know the right answer, that we're not willing to listen to what makes sense and think together about what makes sense. I mean, think about it. We are having a pitched battle about masks. You know, masks are trivial. They're tiny little things at the end of the day. They don't matter much one way or another. They happen to work, but that we should be fighting about masks? I mean, give me a break. We ought to be fighting, if we're going to argue with each other, we ought to, maybe think about, I don't know, about who should be taxed how much, or, whether colleges should be free. These are substantial issues. Masks? Give me a break.
But to me, that's symbolic. So it seems to me, as I take a look at the Trump administration, I take a look at President Trump. It's not about mass; it's about power. It's about demonstrating to your followers that you are stronger and you know more, and you're impervious to this disease, and as they should be. Today he said it was like the flu.
I mean, I guess we're going to find out how impervious that he is. We knew going in that his likelihood of survival was 95%. And, you know, as long as you're in the 95% group, you can feel as impervious as you want. But the moment you cross into the 5% group, the people who are made sick, the, 210,000 people who have died of this so far, all of a sudden you're much more vulnerable. As public policy, we don't seem to be able to deal with a somewhat complicated idea. The simple idea would be this thing is going to kill everybody, and so everybody's got to do something. This is not that simple. It's most people will deal with it well. Too many, but relatively few will get very sick and die. And are we as a society willing to change what we each do to protect the people at risk? Looks like there are some of us who are, and some of us who say we're going to put those people on the ash heap. Anybody who gets sick is a loser.
Yeah, I'll never forget when my mother was very ill a number of years ago. A hospitalist at one of the local hospitals, and I won't mention which one, turned to me and said, "Well, I think people should have an expiration date on their driver's licenses, meaning not an expiration date for the driver's license, an expiration date for their lives." In those days, I was editor of the Business News, and I wrote a column in which I suggested that doctors should go to the funerals of the people that they've lost.
Yeah, and as it happens, I often used to go to the funeral of the people who were my patients because I felt so connected to them. And, I mean, I still keep a photo of a woman who was in a nursing home and who was forced to go into the nursing home by the Department of Health because she had exceeded the standards for other kinds of care. She fell in the nursing home. Somebody sent me, her daughter sent me a picture, and I keep that picture on my desk because I think all of us need to be reminded and thoughtful about how our bright ideas affect real people.
So it's pretty clear we have a leadership vacuum. What can our leaders do to to regain that leadership, but also to regain the trust of so many Americans? I fear that when the vaccine comes out, people are going to be very reluctant to take it because they're not going to trust it.
Yeah, I think we need to move to making healthcare not for profit, and we need to get scrupulous about making sure that people in leadership don't personally profit from decisions they make for all of us. The entrance of things that are for profit, of each person wanting to get personal advantage from their decisions, I think that's been devastating for our public life.
Do you have, and maybe this is not a fair question so much, in taking a look at the two presidential candidates, does one make you feel more comfortable than the other relative to at least the approach to the coronavirus?
Well, if I take just the coronavirus itself and look at the debate performance, I didn't hear anything at the debate performance that I thought was particularly satisfying from either candidate. I thought the president's approach, mocking masks, was particularly difficult and somewhat irresponsible. But I wasn't exactly thrilled with what Vice President Biden said either in terms of his policy. He sounded like nobody had really prepared him to talk knowledgeably about how to approach coronavirus. His sense was just give money to states. And that isn't going to be enough. We need a much more robust approach, and I'd like to hear that from both of them, from either of them. That's what it's going to take to persuade me about coronavirus itself. There are other issues of style, but that's not the question.
Besides masks, hand washing, physical distancing, the development of a vaccine, what else is there to do?
We need to develop backbone. That is to say, we need to have thousands, hundreds of thousands, in the United States, millions of healthcare workers helping people do the right thing. And we need to develop the backbone we need to make sure that people do the right thing. Once upon a time, in the era of tuberculosis, directors of departments of health had the ability to put people who didn't take their medicine in jail, or to make sure that they were taking their medicine every single day. We would send people out to everyone's house every single day, and if they didn't take their medicine, they would actually be put in jail because they were putting everyone else at risk. We have lost all that backbone.
We have
so
some sort of a. I'm sorry. Are we suggesting that we have some sort of a system of fines if somebody doesn't wear a mask?
Yeah, I think we need to really encourage people and try to avoid fining people, but there are people who just aren't going to get it, and we need to be able to have some penalties for people who don't mask. We need to do the same thing for isolation and for quarantine. If you don't quarantine correctly, if you go out and party when you've got coronavirus, I hate to say it, but if you want to go, driving around the parking lot while you've got active disease, as far as I'm concerned, there should be significant penalties, up to and including, imprisonment if you persist, because you're putting other people at risk.
Looking at a timeline, where do we go from here? When will a vaccine be available? When will it be available in sufficient quantities to be able to take care of everyone? And when that vaccine comes, does that mean we can get rid of masks and all that other stuff?
Well, I think from a timeline perspective, you will see one vaccine available in tiny amounts in the beginning of November. That's more for political reasons than it is for public health reasons. I think we will begin to see the number of vaccine that we need, the quantity of vaccine we need, arriving in March, April, or May, maybe June. Then we're going to have to work out how to get many, many, many millions of people vaccinated. So I don't expect, and remember, this is likely to be at least a 2-vaccine series, not a single shot. So I don't expect us to be adequately vaccinated until January or February of 2022 at the earliest, not in 2021 itself. So I'm not expecting that we can reduce social distancing and masking until sometime in 2022.
The decision to send kids back to school, wise decision or not so wise?
A tough decision. I mean, kids need to be in school. They need that kind of connection and oversight. And that's where they learn and grow. It's also a place in which disease is spread, and we know that. So it's just a tough decision that nobody wins at. Bringing kids back, particularly in places where there isn't much disease, makes good sense as long as it's carefully monitored and as long as you have the ability to close a class or a school when you need to, when there's an outbreak of disease, which there will be. This was, as I said, a tough decision. And I think putting the needs of kids first is important. But if we were wiser, we would not try to do it at the same time as we have bars operating and inside dining operating And we would be particularly careful about asking people over 50 to really stay isolated, because it's people over 50 who are at greatest risk. You know, and they're the people where we're going to see, in that group of people, we're going to see hospitalizations and deaths, and the disease will spread from school kids to everybody else. It's just going to happen as long as schools are open. So older people need to be particularly careful as long as schools are open.
So, which means isolation for many of them, pretty much, at a time when we're pretty social animals. When we lack that socialization, it becomes a great emotional strain on us.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of an interesting, almost existential choice. So believe it or not, I'm over 50, and you know, I think from the perspective of public health, you know, I want to stay, you know, at home as much as possible, and be very careful about my outside contacts. As a human being who wants to participate in the world, I'm going to participate actively when I can, if I can do it in a way that's safe, because, you know, I'm going to make a personal choice, and have a number of times, to say I'm going to take some physical risk, because I think the community connection is important. You know, I went out and marched at the periphery of the march during the Black Lives Matters march, because I thought I needed to be there, and that was more important than my personal health. And I'm going to vote in person on November 3rd, because I think my presence voting is way more important than whether I live or die. Those are existential choices that individuals make, but we as a society ought to be trying to persuade people like me to stay home as much as I can, and make sure that people who are over 50 have access to food and to the other things they need, so that they don't have to go out very much, and so protect not only the individuals, but the public's health as a whole.
So you're comfortable with where we've gone as a state, uncomfortable where we've gone as a nation, because I think we've been slow to begin to address this, but also the ongoing leadership. What would be your overall message to people at this stage, at this point?
To go the distance, to make sure that we have discipline and backbone, so that we aren't afraid to do what we need to do to protect everybody, because we can protect everybody better. You know, we ought to be looking hard at what South Korea did. South Korea has a fraction of the number of infections we have, a tiny, tiny fraction. The nation of 52 million people gets 100 new cases a day, which is what little Rhode Island gets right now, with the population of 1 million. But they've been able to keep their schools open and their businesses open because they just worked harder at it. We should be working way harder than we are. And working hard, not just to reduce infection and preventable death, but to bring back our civic life, which we can do if we develop backbone and just, you know, really work at this with more intensity.
So what are the things that South Korea did that were different than what we've done?
Well, they did lots of testing. Testing isn't the whole story, but it's part. They are very good about isolation. When somebody in South Korea gets sick with coronavirus, they are moved out of their house and brought to a special isolation hospital where they stay until they recover. That helps reduce spread inside households, which in Rhode Island has been a major source of the spread of disease. The South Koreans are willing to close a school, and the Germans do this too. Close a school the moment there's, you know, more than a couple of cases, and leave it closed for 2 or 3 weeks. We need to have that discipline. We're doing that, I think, reasonably. But on the isolation side, we're nowhere near what they're doing, and the South Koreans really monitor who's sick. They use all sorts of social media to do it. I'm pretty sure that they are much more intense about making sure people who are in isolation stay in isolation, and people who are in quarantine stay in quarantine. People in quarantine, in my view, need to be tested 5 days into their quarantine. And before they leave quarantine at 13 or 14 days, we're not doing any of that. And that's why the South Koreans have us badly beat.
My presumption is that, we have all these people who have said, open the economy, don't worry about the health stuff. We got to get the economy open. I presume that you would be of a mind that take care of the health stuff and the economy will open quicker and stay open longer.
Exactly right. I mean, I think trying to open the economy too early is a fool's errand. I think you'll get it open for a couple of weeks, and then you'll have to close it down again when the disease runs rampant, which it will. The disease is a fierce taskmaster. It's not going to go away because somebody doesn't like it. It's going to do what it's going to do regardless of what we say. We just have to understand how it works and beat it and outthink it, and we can do that.
So, Dr. Fine, I want to take a left turn now, and I want to talk about Michael Fine, the author. You are the author of a novel called Abundance. You have, of course, the Healthcare Revolt, which is a nonfiction book. You have published short stories, and you have a book of short stories coming out in November, The Bull and Other Stories. And tell us about that.
Well, I write a short story a month or two, and I've done so for a long time. I think The Bull has some of the better of those short stories, maybe the best of those short stories. And they are all over the place in terms of where they're set and who they're about. They're about human beings and their own experiences, their own perspectives and their own conflicts and struggles and their inner lives. So there's a story about a retired school principal who farms and raises a bull in Tennessee. There's a story about somebody who's schizophrenic living on Kennedy Plaza. There's a story about an electrician who's working at a school in Cranston during an attempted school invasion. All sorts of wild stuff.
Where do you get the information or the material for these stories?
Everywhere, just listening, reading, thinking, being in the world when I was able to, but even now, listening to people's stories. I practiced medicine for a long time, and I think lots of what I have experienced, lots of the stories I heard, lots of the voices telling those stories bubble up in these stories in different ways. As I work with people, I do a fair amount of work in Central Falls. As I work in Central Falls, their stories show up in these stories, not one for one, it's their voices that show up. Because I really think the real challenge in a democracy is to listen to the voices of other people and understand their perspectives. And these stories sort of show those voices and let me imagine the lives of other people, so that I can put myself in their shoes, and so that we, all of us together, can be one people as we imagine each other's lives and experience and develop a certain amount of connection and perhaps even empathy.
In this book, do you have a favorite story? The Bull, is that one of the stories?
Yeah, no, I think The Bull is a favorite story, but they all become kind of favorites. But I think The Bull is a particularly powerful story.
So you sound like, I went to a wine tasting once with Christian Brothers Wines, and Brother Timothy, who took care of the some major part of the winery. And I go up to him and I asked him, I said, "What's your favorite wine?" And he looked at me. He said, "They're all like my children."
That's the way I feel. You know, when I think about this book and I think about the stories, I feel all these people as if they exist. You know, they seem like friends and relatives and colleagues. You know, they feel real to me, even though, you know, they're all made up.
The difference between writing a novel and writing a short story.
Is like the difference between going for a walk and running a couple of 100 miles. You know, a short story is a walk. It's, you know, constructed in my case, usually in a week or two, though with work on it over time. A novel is a year or two of totally committed work with no other life during that period.
What do you want the reader to take from your works?
The notion that we are all in this together and that people are so interesting and have these inner lives that, you know, we don't always think about. The notion that, you know, my inner life is not that different from someone else's inner life, though the content of our focus may be different. That we are one people at the end of the day.
How does your medical relate to your writing?
Well, I think medicine taught me to listen, or even better, gave me the opportunity to listen. You know, when I was in practice, I would hear 20 stories a day. And my aim was, you know, yes, to be good at, you know, the diagnosis and treatment part, but my real aim was to be connected to the human being, to hear that story 20 times a day. And let me tell you, you know, that level of connection is pretty tiring to do 20 times a day. But it was that sense of listening to those stories that was so important to me. And it's the ability to tell those stories that's important to me now.
I want to take another left turn. I always take these silly left turns. I never take a right turn. I always take a left turn. And I want to go back to where we are with the coronavirus, but I want to take a look at healthcare, how that has changed. We've got telehealth now, for better or worse. I think that people are delaying certain treatments because they don't have the confidence to go into the doctor's office. We have mental health issues because of isolationism, and we have this new corporate structure when it comes to medicine. The family doctor has gone the way of the independent pharmacy.
Yeah, and gone the way of the family farm. I think we are in the middle of a sea change, and it's kind of up to us to vote with our feet about what we want. But what we're getting is a kind of corporatized, anonymous, you know, sort of set of rules and regulations. You know, it's like once upon a time, you could go to the bank and talk to a teller. Now all that stuff is gone. We are losing the personal connection, the relationships we have. And we are only losing them because we're allowing them to be taken from us. We have to spend a little more money. We have to take a little more time. We all have to decide in our own selves what's worth it for us and whether we want to have the life that we're being given. In healthcare, we're not going to be given much of a life at all. You know, you'll get your sore throat treated over the phone, but you won't get known as a human being. And that's, to me, a heartbreak.
Are people putting on serious healthcare issues or seeing a doctor for serious healthcare issues for fear of going into the doctor's office, or for that not even being available and then only having telehealth available?
Yeah, I think both things are happening. I think there is fear on the part of the public, and it's not unintelligent fear. You know, there was just an outbreak of cases at Rhode Island Hospital. You know, logically, you know, when you go to a place where there are people who are sick, you're more likely to get infected, despite everybody's very intense effort to contain that. And then I think healthcare providers, though I hate that word, healthcare clinicians are doing everything they can to keep everyone safe. And for them, that means trying to do as much as they can over the telephone or over video, you know, which is okay, except you tend to lose that personal connection.
I know that you have been a strong advocate for community health centers. Have they, has this coronavirus done anything to change the need for that, or does it elevate the need for those centers in many more places than we have them today?
I think it elevates the need for more community health centers, and also suggests to me that every single American should be enrolled in a primary medical practice of some sort or the other. Because one of the constraints the community health centers face is they were only able to really take care of the people who were their existing patients. So that meant there were lots of people who would have benefited from a primary medical connection who couldn't get one because they weren't already existing patients of community health centers. We should be expanding community health centers, but also requiring that everyone has a primary care connection and making sure that happens.
You mentioned earlier that you thought that medicine or the medical profession should be on a nonprofit basis as opposed to for-profit. And for-profit, of course, now with the development of these corporations, the doctors are more beholden. It's like just like any corporation, the doctors are more beholden to the shareholders than they are perhaps to their patients. And we have these other levels that have come in: the nurse practitioner, the physician's assistant. You have to go through these various hurdles to actually get yourself in to see the doc for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think making healthcare not for profit would fix a lot of the healthcare problems that we have, so that people wouldn't always be suspicious about what somebody's motives are. The problem that we face is that we've kind of lost our faith in government, and government has lost its faith in itself. So nobody's willing to let government do it. And that, you know, like when you don't have government focused on not-for-profit activity, then the question is, who becomes the trustable not-for-profit that is actually responsible to the community it serves? So we have some challenges figuring that out. You know, I'd be more comfortable having government create a healthcare system, but I think we first have a lot of work to do restoring American faith in government itself and restoring government moxie so that government feels like it's meaningful and trustable, because I'm not sure it feels like that at the present moment.
Are we, Ryan? Look, you sound like you have a question.
Well, I know the doctor has a tight schedule here and has to jump off here in a minute, but I just wanted to make sure that we go back to the books at some point and find out where we can get them, how we can find the books, where we can find the books that he has authored.
Great question. The easiest way to do that, I actually have a website, www.michaelfinemd.com, and all the books and all the short stories are actually available through that. The other, that's sort of the best option. Take you to the audiobook as well, which is new. But the best option is to go to the website.
Excellent.
Great. I just have one more quick question, and then we can jump off. We now have this conversation with Lifespan and Care New England, not Care and Care New England. We have all hospitals in Rhode Island, with the exception of South County, are part of a larger networks. Is that good or bad?
Well, it could be good if we handled it right. I have long been an advocate for many, many years of putting Lifespan and Care New England together. There are clinical collaborations that have been happening that this corporate process is messed up. And those clinical collaborations are important. But if you do that, you have to do it inside the framework of a hospital regulatory commission. Otherwise, a combined hospital entity will likely run the meter and bankrupt the state. So the good news is putting them together makes sense. But the challenge is to have enough confidence in government to put together a hospital regulatory environment to make that a coherent contribution to the hospital environment in Rhode Island.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Michael Fine, we appreciate your time today. We know you're a busy man, and we'll have to do it again very soon.
Thank you both. Thanks for the opportunity.
Of course, and we will talk to you again really soon. And Mr. Prosnitz, you are getting some good big old kudos for this interview today. Ken from our team says excellent interview.
I sent him $1.
Yes. And Chip says, wow, well done, agreed. And then Vincent says, appreciate your community conversations. And yeah, so people enjoyed the conversation and the frankness of it all.
Yeah, but that's me, frankness.
Frankness, yes. Some interesting points there where, vaccine, social distancing, he sees it. If we were going to write a headline out of this interview, that would probably be it, where he sees us doing it up until 2020.
Yeah, I guess what I would see the headline out of this is the lack of leadership that we've had, and the need for stronger leadership and examples as we go forward and more unified country.
That's it. All right, sir. Well, I appreciate it. You and I, if we don't do it beforehand, we'll be back here on Thursday night at 7 p.m. We'll be hosting a discussion between the Newport City Council Ward 2 candidates, Charlie Holder, as well as Kim Salerno, if we don't meet up before then.
Yeah. Do we need boxing gloves for that? Or are we all set?
We're all set.
Oh, good.
It's going to be a good conversation. It's going to be a discussion, conversation.
Yep.
Candidates going to have longer than 90 seconds to answer questions because, let's be honest, you can't answer anything in 90 seconds.
No, you can't.
And we're just going to get to know the candidates. That is our goal, and provide the info to everybody, just as we've done for about 40 of them now, and let you take it in and do what you want with it. So, all right, sir.
Thank you.
All right, on behalf of Mr. Prosnitz, as well as myself and all of us here at What's Up Newp, I want to thank Dr. Michael Fine for joining us here today. We will have him back on again. Great conversation. If you missed any portion of our conversation, want to rewatch it again, want to share it with your friends, it is available on whatsupnewp.com now. One-on-one, a conversation with Dr. Michael Fine right there at the top of the site. And as you heard, the conversation spans from COVID-19, changes in healthcare, his books, and more. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Community Conversations. Have somebody that we should talk to. Email me, ryan@whatsupnewp.com. We'd love to highlight and converse with members of our community. In the meantime, stay tuned to whatsupnewp.com for the latest on what's happening new and to do in Newport County, Rhode Island, and beyond.